Hello everyone, how is it going? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, well, we've got some important business to attend to, and that is because we are going to be ranking every single Nintendo DS console. So in order to rank each system, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 4 key factors and give each system a score between 1 to 10 on each of those factors, and then we're going to get our calculators up, add up each of the scores, and rank the systems accordingly. So the first factor is looks, which essentially just looks at how cool the system is appearance wise. Then we've got functionality, which looks at what the system can do and how good it is at doing that. Then we've got comfortability, which looks at how comfortable the system is to use for extended periods of time. And finally, we've got the does it need to exist category, which will look at whether the system needed to exist at all, because I don't know about you guys, but I feel like there's quite a lot of Nintendo DS revisions, and I don't mean to be rude here, but not all of them seem to be completely necessary. So we're going to look at that as well. And then once we've looked at each system, as I said, we will add the scores together and we'll put them on this lovely little leaderboard that I've made here. And from this leaderboard, we will know the definitive ranking of every Nintendo DS console. So let's get into it, shall we? The original Nintendo DS. Let's get cracking on this. Having a look at the appearance of this thing, it is questionable. It is questionable. It's definitely not the prettiest system in the world. I think back in the day, they were definitely going for that futuristic look, but I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't think it holds up, so it gets a 3 out of 10. Next up, we've got the functionality. The system does amazing things for the time it was released at. Obviously, it's one of the first devices that popularized the touchscreen. It's got the stylus, which allows you to utilize the touchscreen. All of the buttons do their job. I do note that the screen is pretty horrid on this one, so that does detract a little bit from the functionality as well. Nonetheless, I think for the time it was pretty good function wise, so I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. For comfortability, I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10 as well. I actually quite like the beefier size of the original Nintendo DS. I know it's not really much bigger, but it just feels a lot bigger in the hands, which is definitely nice, so it gets that 7 out of 10. And on the does it need to exist scale, it gets a 10 out of 10. This was a system that really did revolutionize handheld gaming, so I don't care what you say about how it looks and how it holds up today. For the time it was released in, it definitely gets a 10 out of 10. So overall, that means the original Nintendo DS gets a score of 27. The Nintendo DS Lite. I think most people watching this would agree that just based on first glance, the appearance and looks of this system is miles better than the original Nintendo DS. I honestly think it still looks great and holds up to today's standards, so based on that, it gets a 9 out of 10 on looks. Functionality wise, the Nintendo DS Lite is slimmer, it's got brighter screens, it's got a better battery life. It's just overall a few improvements to the original that makes the functionality slightly better. There's not too much different between the Nintendo DS and the DS Lite, but nonetheless, there's definitely an improvement in functionality. So the DS Lite gets an 8 out of 10. I just realized while editing this video that I completely forgot to mention the GBA backwards compatibility for both the Nintendo DS Lite and the original Nintendo DS. Oopsies. Before you start roasting me in the comments section, please rest assured that I did take this into account with my functionality scores. I just forgot to talk about it in the video. Real smart of me, hey. Anyways, that's it. Back to the video. Next up, for comfortability, I'm going to give the DS Lite a 6 out of 10, just because I feel like it's a little bit smaller and just, I don't know, I've got really big hands and it's just less comfy to hold, so it's going to get a 6 out of 10 there. And then lastly, for the does it need to exist category, it's going to get a 9 out of 10. Similarly to the original Nintendo DS, the Nintendo DS Lite just, again, revolutionized the system. It made some decent quality of life improvements on the original Nintendo DS, which just really exploded the Nintendo DS line of systems into the general public. So for that reason, it gets a 9 out of 10. So with that, the DS Lite gets an overall score of 32, which places it above the original Nintendo DS. Okay, let's look at the DSi. So based on appearance, I think similarly to the Nintendo DS Lite, this one looks really nice. So for that, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 as well. For functionality, unfortunately, the DSi does lose quite a bit of functionality compared to the DS Lite, as it loses that GBA backwards compatibility, which is a bit unfortunate. That is just such a massive thing. There's so many GBA games that are just amazing, and with this revision, you lose any and all access to play those, unless of course you have a Game Boy, but whatever. It is true that the DSi has, cameras on it, it has access to DSiWare, and a shop, but I think overall that loss of the backwards compatibility is such a big deal, so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. For comfortability, I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10 for essentially the same reasons I gave the DS Lite a 6 out of 10. Just based on form factor, these consoles are very similar. And for the does it need to exist category, again, I'm unfortunately going to have to give this one a 4 out of 10. I just don't really see the need for the DSi. I feel like the DS Lite does everything you need it to versus the DSi. Like, the extra additions on the DSi don't really add anything to the overall gaming experience, at least in my opinion. So overall, that means the DSi gets a total score of just 24, which places it at the bottom of the scoreboard so far. Next up, we've got the Nintendo DSi XL. Based on appearance, I think I'm going to have to give it the exact same score as just the regular DSi at an 8 out of 10. Whilst it's bigger, it doesn't really look any different, so it's kind of hard to justify a different score. Functionality-wise, the DSi XL is again the same as the DSi, so I'm going to give that one a 4 out of 10. And for comfortability, the DSi XL gets an 8 out of 10 just because of that bigger system size. It makes it much more comfier in the hands to hold, and me being a guy with big hands really does appreciate that, so it gets the 8 out of 10. And for the does it need to exist category, I feel like the Nintendo DSi XL really does have a place. The first introduction of that XL model is pretty massive. I think the XL models of DSs just in general are great. They're just so much more comfier to play with and really appeal to that older audience. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10 on that category. And with that, the Nintendo DSi XL gets a score of 28, placing it just above the original Nintendo DS. The Nintendo 3DS. Based on appearance, I think this system looks awesome. It looks so sleek, so modern, and just, I don't know, it just has a really great look to it, so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Moving on to functionality, obviously the Nintendo 3DS has got that stereoscopic 3D with no need for glasses as well, which is pretty cool, but it does have some drawbacks in a sense that you have to look at the screen from a certain fixed position in order to get that full 3D effect. And based on that, I don't think the 3DS really delivers on its functionality all that well. Whilst it does have the 3D, it doesn't do it as well as I think it should. Obviously, it came out in 2011, and technology-wise, it was perhaps a bit restrictive, but nonetheless, I do think that's a valid point. It's worth noting the 3DS does have backwards compatibility to all DS games, which is very nice. So overall, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Moving on to comfortability, I actually think the original Nintendo 3DS is the least comfortable Nintendo DS system. I don't know what it is about it. I think the shoulder buttons are just really hard for my fingers to press, and it makes my hands cramp so easily when I'm playing this system, so I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. And moving on to the does it need to exist category, I think this was a pretty big system in the DS line of consoles. Obviously, introducing glasses-free 3D is pretty cool, so I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. And with that, the Nintendo 3DS gets a total score of 25. The Nintendo 3DS XL. Appearance-wise, it's very similar to the Nintendo 3DS, just a little bit bigger. So for that reason, it's going to get the same score of a 9 out of 10. For functionality, it's going to get a 5 out of 10. Similarly to the 3DS, obviously the 3D feature isn't perfect, but as well as that, I feel like the system's a little bit more flimsy in its build quality. So for that reason, it's just going to get a 5 out of 10. For comfortability, the 3DS XL gets an 8 out of 10. It's just, the XL models are just great for gaming on. They really are comfortable to hold for extended periods of time. And for the does it need to exist category, I'm going to give the 3DS XL a 7 out of 10. Similarly to the DSi XL, I think it's very warranted having that larger model. So overall, the Nintendo 3DS XL gets a score of 29, which places it second on the list. Not too bad. The Nintendo 2DS was a very interesting system, as it took a step away from the traditional DS formula and presented something completely new. And I'm gonna be real here, I love the Nintendo 2DS. I think appearance-wise, some people probably hate the 2DS, but I think it's fine. Like, it looks good, and it's fine to play on. It's fine to just have sitting on your desk. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's definitely an interesting and unique design, but I still think it looks good. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Functionality-wise, obviously, as the name suggests, the 2DS cannot play games in 3D, which is a major drawdown for the system. But other than that, it can pretty much do everything else that the 3DS can do. So for that reason, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 10. Moving on to comfortability, this system is the most comfortable DS system. It's got really big shoulder buttons which sit at just the right spot and are super easy to press. So it gets a 10 out of 10. On the does it need to exist scale, I don't think it really needs to exist. It doesn't add anything to the DS line, it more so takes stuff away. I guess you could argue that it adds affordability to the DS's, but this video is not really looking at price comparisons. So for that reason, I'm unfortunately going to have to give it a 2 out of 10. I do still love this system, but it's hard to give it a good score in that area. So overall, the Nintendo 2DS gets a score of 23, which places it at the bottom of the list for now, which is really unfortunate because the 2DS is awesome in a lot of ways. Next up, we have got the new Nintendo 3DS, and just based on appearance, I absolutely adore this system. I think the buttons look so cool and so fun. The system looks modern, it looks sleek, and for that reason, it gets a 10 out of 10. Functionality-wise, the new Nintendo 3DS does everything you would want it to do. It's got the tracking 3D effect, which means you can play the system on various different angles and still get that full 3D effect. It has backwards compatibility to all DS games. So for that reason, it also gets a 10 out of 10. It also has the faceplates, which I personally don't really care about, but I guess that's also an additional function that no other DS console has. But moving on to the comfortability, the new Nintendo 3DS is again really uncomfortable to play on. Similarly to the original Nintendo 3DS, it's just, I don't know, I think it's just too small for me. And obviously that's a very personal opinion there, and that would change between person to person. But just for me, it's just not comfortable to play on. It's a little bit better than the original 3DS, just based on some of the changes to the button placements. But overall, it's not great, so it gets a 4 out of 10. And on the does it need to exist scale, this one it gets a 6 out of 10. I don't think it's the most important system to exist, just based on the fact that the new Nintendo 3DS XL does pretty much everything the new Nintendo 3DS does, but is slightly better just based on it being larger, especially since both systems launched at the same time. Like, you could probably argue that with the DSi and the 3DS, they had a bit more of a reason to exist, as at the time they launched, there were no XL models on the market, whereas with the new 3DS, they launched at the same time, and it's kind of like, unless you really love faceplates, why would you be buying this over the XL model? With that being said, the overall quality of life improvements offered by the new Nintendo 3DS are very notable, so for that reason it gets a 6 out of 10. And overall that gives the new Nintendo 3DS a score of 30, which I believe, yeah, that places it in second place at the moment, so that's pretty good. Next up, we've got the new Nintendo 3DS XL. We'll just quickly go through this one because it's pretty similar in a lot of ways to the new Nintendo 3DS. So based on looks, it gets a 10 out of 10 for the same reasons explained before. Functionality wise, again, it gets a 10 out of 10. It's just the definitive way to play DS and 3DS games. Comfortability wise, it is a lot better than the new Nintendo 3DS model. The extra size of this makes it really comfortable, and all the buttons feel really nice. So for that reason, it gets an 8 out of 10. And on the does it need to exist scale, the new Nintendo 3DS XL gets an 8 out of 10. And the main reason for this is simply because it is the definitive way to play 3DS and DS games. It's bigger and more comfortable than the new Nintendo 3DS, and it has that optimized 3D with the eye tracking, so it really does have everything you would want in a DS. And that is the highest score so far, with a total score of 36. And finally, we have got the new Nintendo 2DS XL. Appearance-wise, this one, it just looks a bit funny to me. I don't know, the smartphone top screen it just looks a little bit cheap. I don't know if I'm the only one of that opinion, but I just really don't like the top screen on this one. It's just so plasticky and glossy, and obviously trying to mimic a smartphone screen, that it just doesn't really look that great. I'm sure there are a lot of people who would disagree with that, but nonetheless, because of that, it's going to get a 5 out of 10. Functionality wise, it pretty much has the exact same functionality as the 2DS, except it does have those extra buttons on it and the C sticks. So I guess for that reason, I'll give it a 6 out of 10 for functionality. For comfortability, it gets the same score as the new Nintendo 3DS XL at an 8 out of 10. It's pretty much the same kind of form factor for how you hold it, so I don't see any reason why I should change it from an 8 out of 10. And on the does it need to exist scale, I'm giving this one a 2 out of 10. It just seems like such a random DS revision that no one was really asking for. I might be wrong on that, but that's just the feeling I get from the new Nintendo 2DS XL. So overall, it gets a score of 21, which I believe puts it right down there at the bottom of the list. So I'm sorry, new Nintendo 2DS XL, I don't see it, okay? Anyways, that's gonna wrap up today's video. I do hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.